Ever since I started doing Makita 40 volt reviews 2.5 years ago, I've been getting one question right from the start, and today we're going to answer that question. We're going to first take a quick look at the lineage of 40 volt Makita saws. The very first one that was released was a 165mm saw with the blade on the right. As you can see, this is the HS001G. The HS002G is basically the same tool with AWS. The HS003G is a 185mm saw. This was the very first one that I reviewed, the first one you could get in New Zealand, and it comes with AWS. The 04 is the same size saw, but it has a track compatible base, has a groove through here. Then along came the 05. It is, as you can see, a very small one. This is a 125mm saw, 5-inch, and the front comes off. The 06 is this tool with AWS. The 07 is this tool, but the front doesn't come off. And the 08 is this tool, the front doesn't come off, and it has AWS. Then when we jump to the 09, we have a 235mm saw with a track compatible base. The 10 is the same size saw, the 235mm, without a track compatible base. Then we have the beast, the 11. This one, 270mm, 260 in some countries. It is a beast. It can cut down to 104mm. So that's number 11. Up until this point, all 11 saws are blade on the right. Hold them in your hand. The blade is on the right hand side. And right from the start, many of you have been calling for a 165mm or 6.5-inch blade left saw. And up until now, there's been no release outside of Japan, I think. Maybe a few Asian countries have it, I'm not sure, of a 165mm 40 volt saw. That is until the HS012G. Makita's first blade left 40 volt circular saw. You asked for it, Makita listened, here it is. Everyone was saying they wanted a GSH006 with a 40 volt battery on it. Well, that's pretty much exactly what you've got. Side by side, the biggest initial difference is the color of the guard area and the base, and of course the battery platform. Apart from that, they are very similar looking tools. There is of course some upgrades on the 40 volt that the 18 volt doesn't have, and so let's take a look at those. 40 volt here on the right, 18 on the left. You can see the 40 volt is a little bit narrower just here, and the motor area much smaller. Smaller motor? Wouldn't higher voltage mean a bigger motor? No, it's the opposite. You can get more grunt out of a smaller motor if you've got more volts going through it. To get more power out of an 18 volt tool, you have to keep making that motor bigger and bigger. And that's what some companies are doing, but Makita have changed the voltage and they've gone smaller motor. But presumably this has more power than this. When it comes to RPM, this is 5,000 RPM, this is 5,200. But RPM of course is not the power sort of rating. This ripping timber struggles, whereas hopefully this will have the sustained power to push through. Bit more torque with that 40 volt motor, but you'll have to wait a little bit longer to find that out. So the XGT about 145 wide, whereas the LXT is about 165 wide. And if you look at them side on like that, you can see this is bigger than this area here. This is where they've managed to get the savings in the width just from the motor housing. They have removed the battery indicator that used to be on the 18 volt. No need for it on the 40 volt, of course, because the battery is right there with the lights on it. Easy. The bases are the same width and the same length, so you'll have no problems if you've got a guide rail adapter for this model to flick it over onto this model. I'll grab one of those and check that before the end of the video for you, but I think it looks like it'll be all good. That does of course mean that this does not come with a groove for a guide rail, but that's not a bad thing, because if this did have that, it would be substantially wider. The base would be out here. I will show you one with an adapter on it, and as you can see, it adds a significant amount to the width of the saw. So this base with the adapter 195mm, whereas this base by itself is only 130. So you're talking about 2.5 inches or 65mm more if you want that guide rail base. And that somewhat defeats the purpose of this tool. It's that much wider. This is the sort of tool you want as just a daily tool that you can carry up a ladder and cut things anywhere. Nice and light, nice and nimble, nice and narrow, small as you want it to be to get the job done. If you want a track saw, get a track saw or get a different saw with a track compatible base, because you don't want a big wide base on this size saw. And looking at the size compared to the other 165, the very first one that I mentioned, the HS012G, we'll just take that adapter off. As you can see, the body hangs out a long way past the end of that base, massively so. This one, you've only got that tiny little bit there. We're only talking about 20-30 mil, something like that, so way better for getting into tight spaces. This one sticks out and can hit stuff, but this one is a bit shorter than this one. This one, being the old sort of 18 volt design, has the battery on the back, whereas all the other 40 volt circular saws have the battery mounted on the side. Or in the case of the 125mm saws, it's actually sort of underneath here, which does cause problems because you can't stick the really big batteries on it. Now, if you're interested in one of those two saws and you're wondering why you've never seen them, it's because they're only available in Japan. I'll put some links down in the description if you want. You will have probably also noticed they're both black. You can get them in teal or black. I decided to get black ones just to make them stand out from all my other saws. The base and the guard on the new left blade saw are magnesium, whereas here on the very first one, this is actually plastic that's painted to look like metal. This is plastic, this is plastic. You may have also noticed that this new one has a handle on the front, and this first one does not. Never had a handle on the front. So that I've gotten used to it, but I do tend to hold on to the side of it a lot, whereas it would have been nice at times to have that front handle. And if you're wondering what these lights are, you can change the speed on this first model. It has a top speed of 5,500 RPM and a lower speed of 4,100 for doing finer work, and it's a bit quieter. This new one, just the one speed, 5,200 RPM. Back to comparing it to the 18 volt, you'll see the 18 volt has a lever on the front here for adjusting your bevel, and nothing just here. This one has detent stops, so you can stop it at 50, 45 and 22.5 degrees. That can be quite handy if you're doing a lot of repetitive cuts. Makes it much quicker to set your angle. This guide here is now metal, whereas this one is plastic. Although this one you can adjust it slightly if you need to get the line right with your blade and the way you like it, whereas this one, it is built into the base, so it's not changeable. Although on the base down here you can adjust the base so you can tweak it a little bit if it's not cutting parallel. That is something that you couldn't do with the 18 volt model. They've tweaked the rafter hook design slightly on the 40 volt as well, peeling it around the corner there so it doesn't catch on things. This one sticks out a lot further. This one's a lot gruntier than this one, but this one's overkill. You do not need that gauge steel to hold this very small saw. They've gone down a little bit here. I mean, that's more than enough. Depending on where you live, you may or may not get one of these dust chutes with your tool. The trigger lock on the 18 volt one is one of these lever design ones. Pokes out both sides and you push the lever down, then pull the trigger. Whereas the 40 volt one is more of the push button in the side. Goes out both sides. It's probably slightly more comfortable to use than the 18 volt one. This design on the HS001G is probably my favorite. It's kind of a combination of the two. It's a push-in button, but it's angled like a lever, so you can just slide your finger down and it will push the button in, rather than pushing in from the side. On the 40 volt here, they've cut a couple of grooves in the guard that the 18 volt one doesn't have. It'll help stop dust and shit clogging up. It might even help with the airflow when you've got the vac and everything going. Speaking of vac, the 18 volt does not have this feature, AWS. This hooks up to an AWS capable vac. Now, if you're not familiar with AWS, I'll give you a quick crash course. AWS stands for Auto Start Wireless System, and it basically means there's a Bluetooth in the vac, there's a Bluetooth chip in the tool, and they talk to each other. So when you pull the trigger on your tool, it's like magic, huh? What do you want to see happen with this thing? Oh, I haven't told you about depth of cut. Shall I tell you the depth of cut, or shall I go show you the depth of cut? Let's go see if this cuts as deep as the 18 volt version or as deep as the first 165mm version. I can see by this here that it's not going to cut as deep as the HS001G. But before we get stuck in comparing these things, I better make sure they've got the same blades on them, right? So let's do that now. Let's do the one on the left and the one in the middle. Now we have the same 165mm 25 tooth FE cut blade from Makita on all three tools. Now for the batteries. It's the 18 volt, that's pretty simple. We'll chuck a 5 amp hour on that, freshly charged of course. But what about the 40 volts? I think we'll start with a 2.5 amp hour on each one and we'll ramp it up later in the vid. Incidentally, if you're new to the 40 volt platform and the comparisons with the batteries and stuff, a 40 volt 2.5 amp hour battery is the equivalent of a Makita 5 amp hour battery. So it's the same amount of watt hours in each battery, they're just configured differently. Right, we're sorted. Let's go check the depth of cut. So this first cut is the HS001G, the first Japanese 40 volt saw, and it comes in at 66mm depth of cut. The next one is the 18 volt, which comes in at about 58.5mm depth of cut. And the new one, the HS012G, what are we looking at? Ooh, not as deep as the 18 volt. We are only looking at 56mm. Why is that? If we take a look at the underside of the 18 volt, you'll see there's a bit of a cutout in the base so that it can accommodate the motor housing there to get the absolute maximum depth of cut. The new 40 volt one also has that same cutout, but the motor's still set back. Even at full depth, it does not go into that cutout. They've got something else that is holding this base from coming down. 40 volt here has this extra little piece that juts down lower than the 18 volt one, and it deliberately crashes onto this part of the base and the depth adjustment so that it can't get the base any closer to the tool. So why did they do that? I can't actually see any reason why they've extended that like that. They've obviously got a reason. While we're looking at the depth of cut and stuff, the handle here that releases the base is set much higher than the one on the 18 volt. If you've had the 18 volt, you may have had a problem with this getting below the actual base plate of your saw, so that you have to undo this and adjust it and get it back up. Also, it locks in place much better than the 18 volt one ever did. If you're having problems with the base on yours being a bit wobbly and that lever going below the base, like I said, take a look up in the top corner up here. I did a video on it years ago, just showing how I adjusted mine. Let's now quickly test the depth of cut at 45 degrees. So we're looking at 45mm for the 01, which is pretty much perfect for framing timber in this part of the world. Then here we have the 18 volt, which is about 43, so just a little bit short. And then the new one, only about 40 to 41 mil. How much do they weigh? Without a battery, the 18 volt weighs 2,775 grams, 2.77 kgs. The 01 40 volt weighs 2,830, 2.8 kgs. Take maybe a gram or two off for the green tape that's currently stuck on the bottom. And where does the new 40 volt fit in? Let's take a wee look. 2,656 grams. I did feel it felt a little bit lighter, so 2.6 kgs. So not a huge difference, about 120 grams lighter than the 18 volt predecessor, and a couple of 100 grams over the first 40 volt. Right, what's next? Should we rip some stuff, eh? Now I know some of you are a bit miffed that this does not come with a track compatible base, but look how nice and narrow it is. You put a track compatible base on this thing, it'll end up huge. But never fear, because you can of course get one of these adapters from Makita. This is an official Makita accessory, does not come with the tool, you have to buy it separately. If you're interested in getting one of these, take a look, there'll be a link down in the description where you can buy one or find out the model number. So this is pretty simple. For this particular tool, slide it hard in on this side and then hard in on this side of your saw, like so. Tighten her up and you're ready to go. With the adapter on this side of the tool, you will be able to run the tool along your track with the bulk of the saw on the track, but you can actually run it in the other side as well. And when you do that, you can run it so that your saw is actually hanging off the track. Only this part here will be on. So we'll be hanging off this side of the track, like the whole saw, not running on here. And if you take a look here, if you want to know what this thing is, this helps keep your track square, straight, without having to fluff around too much. And if you're interested in one of those, they're made by StealthMounts. This is a slightly smaller version, so you can get a wide one or a not so wide one. And they are available down in the links in the description if you're interested in one of those. Yeah, I'm not a fan of doing it that way because it's the weight of the saw is hanging off the edge. You've got no support on the weight of the saw and it's just wanting to lift the track. Much better the other way around if you can do it the other way around. As you can see, the adapter has 3 different places to put this bar through. It's got settings on here for when you're beveling, you'll need to adjust this so that you don't cut your rail. But with these 3 different widths here, you can run it on different circular saws. You can also run it on a jigsaw, so it's quite a handy adapter that's not just a single-use adapter. You can put it on this particular saw, which I was currently using with this adapter. The problem with this adapter is it's a little bit wobbly on it because it's actually made for the 125mm saw, and it's also, as you can see, just the 1 bar. This much more sturdy. So anyway, let's go check this out on the rail. We'll do some cuts and some ply, and so for that I might just try it with a nicer blade. This is a 56 tooth blade, 1.45mm kerf. It is a very nice blade. I'll go cut some ply now. I'll chuck this Effie Cut fluorine coated blade on. These blades are super good if you don't want shit sticking to your blade. They stay nice and clean. They stay nice and sharp for so long. These are my favorite Makita blades, possibly my favorite blades ever. They're just great blades that just last and last. And yeah, they do a good finish, and I'll go and use it right now. Right, let's have a quick 2x4 cutting race, or 4x2, or 100x50, or 90x45, whatever. Right, what do you reckon? Is this what you wanted? Is this the left-hand blade saw you wanted to get on the 40-volt platform? Is this what you've been waiting for? Let me know down in the comments. I had to remove the dust port while I was doing some of the cuts when I was cutting fast, trying to cut fast with this thing. This thing was blocking up, so I had to remove that. Once I removed it, it fired out of there, no problem. So if you're cutting wet lumber, might pay to leave this off so that all your shit can come out of there unless you've got the vac hooked up to it. Now, when I first tried this, I was thinking, you know, yeah, it's a good saw. But I'd gotten so used to the other 40-volt one that I kind of forgot what the 18-volt one had been like, because I haven't really used this for a couple of years now. So once I sort of got that one out of my head and tried thinking about this one more and comparing it to this 18-volt one in the background here, I realized, yeah, this is a nice saw, and it's weighted nicely. The original one is a bit odd. It doesn't have that front handle if you want the front handle, and it juts out the side a long way, whereas this one, as you've seen, does not. And it's just a little bit easier, I found, to get a straight cut. The other one wants to twist, especially the 125. So yeah, it takes a bit more practice to get used to the other one, whereas this one is much more easy. Just grab and go, cut, bang. Nice, quick, easy, straight cuts. Just, yeah, easy to use. It's got the blade on the left, of course, so for all you guys who want the easy line of sight. And that, of course, though, does put the weight on the wrong side of the tool. When you're off cut and you cut along, it's going to want to drop off that way. If you're right-handed, traditionally these sort of saws are made for left-handed people. I remember donkeys years ago, show how old I am. Circular saws are basically right blade tools. All the corded ones in this part of the world anyway, they're all right blade. And then when the cordless ones started coming out, they all started coming out left blade for some reason. And everyone was like, what the hell? What's with that? Left-hand blade? We're not all left-handed. What's going on? And I used to get so many comments about it when I was using my Hitachi one many years ago from older builders that would say, what? What's up with you? You're left-handed. And it's like, why are you using a left-handed saw with your right hand? So a lot of people don't get it. And I know why, because ideally the blade should be on the right if you're cutting for holding your timber and doing the cut without this dropping off the side. But once you get used to it, and depending on what you're doing, if you're doing things above your head and stuff like that, this is a great little saw. With the bigger batteries, doesn't seem to make any difference with the RPMs. I couldn't tell any difference putting the batteries on, and just, you know, let's try it right now, for instance. Let's 2.5 amp hour, 5 amp hour. Still the same. So Makita are regulating that speed pretty well no matter what battery you use. And when you put on those bigger batteries like that 5 and the 8 amp hour, they all fit on the tool okay, but they do make it rather cumbersome. It's now awfully back heavy, and if you're holding it like this, you might notice it's sort of, depending on what angle you're on, it really digs into your arm, so you're stuck there, you know, it's hitting my arm every time. So depending on what you're doing, that battery is going to get in the damn way. Whereas the 2.5, much nicer. It's just the same as using a battery on the 18 volt. So, what do you reckon? Is that what you wanted? Let me know down in the comments, and I will see you on a new video next week. Is it going to be the 80 volt vac, or have you already seen the 80 volt vac? Possibly it's going to be the 80 volt vac, unless the 80 volt vac went out last week. Then it'll be something else. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Go check this out, have a look down in the description. There might be some links to buy them. It's still pretty new on the market, so I don't know what I'll be able to find. It's coming out right now in New Zealand, and I'm not sure about everywhere else, but I know it's going to be a quicker release in most parts of the world than a lot of this XGT stuff's been, especially in the US. So thanks for watching. GSH05 in the US, HS012G everywhere else. Thanks guys, see you on the next one.